Hey y'all, welcome back. Today I'm going to be picking up about $25 in groceries, and I'm going to make several recipes that will make enough portions to feed a single person for about 7 days, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But these recipes are also great for couples and families. Most of these are very kid friendly too. I'm really excited to show you these recipes today, so let's get to the store and get started. First thing I need to get is crackers, and I like these ones for $2.49. The wheat round crackers. Gonna do something fun with those. Okay, next I need to get cheddar, $3.39 for a pound. Just want some extra sharp cheddar. Now I need egg noodles, $1.48. That's a good deal. Next is sour cream. Ooh, $1.85. $1.85, and this is 16 ounces. And this is 1% for $2.07. 1% milk. Organic tofu, $1.65. Right, just 1 dozen eggs for $2.96. Steamed mixed veggies, 99 cents. And then I need some broccoli. I think it's $1.15. Yeah, $1.15. So, next, just 1 can of chili beans, 89 cents. That's a good deal. Okay, let's see. Oh, white onions, 39 cents a pound. That's a good deal. I could get 2 if I needed it. Or maybe I'll just get 1 big one and then just chop it. This is, 10 pounds of potatoes for $4.48. Yay! Ooh, heavy. Okay, and then bananas are 39 cents a pound. This is going to be 6 bananas. So that'll be good for 6 meals. And that is 2.5 pounds at 39 cents a pound. Should have enough to get 1 other fruit. Okay, well that's a good price. Maybe I'll get 3 pounds of cuties. It's only $2.39. I think that should be everything. That is such a good deal on carrots, $1.95 for 2 pounds. So instead of the cuties, I could get the carrots. Okay, so the cuties are ringing up $4.48. So let's just get some Honeycrisp apples instead for $2.74. Today's total was $27.65, but I probably could have done a little bit less if I would have found something for less for the fruit, like bananas. If I would have just done more of those, I probably would have spent less, but I want to keep it interesting and do some apples and bananas this week. As always, I'm also using a few things from my pantry, but most of these are optional. I will say the only thing I recommend getting some extra is some sort of butter or a butter substitute, whatever you use in your house. I know everybody has something different, so after you see the recipes, you can see what you want to substitute, but definitely going to need some sort of fat. And then, of course, we have seasonings, salt, pepper, paprika, and lots of other seasonings, but you just use what you have on hand. I've got some oil that I'm going to be using, mustard, but instead of mustard, of course, you can use horseradish, or if you don't like this kind of flavor, you can omit it. So really, it's totally optional. A lot of people don't use mustard. I'm using some of this bouillon, but if you don't like this, don't have it on hand, don't want to use it, that's fine. You can just use salt, or you can even use a little bit of soy sauce instead, or maybe some coconut aminos to add that umami flavor, and then some flour. I'm not using a ton of flour, but definitely enough to maybe want to grab one at Dollar Tree or something like that if you don't have any flour on hand. And of course, you can use the substitute that you prefer. So really, it's just going to depend on what you have in your pantry, but I'm going to talk about all the substitutions when I go over the recipes. One of the most important things about doing a meal plan like this is doing a lot of the prep work the very first day you get home with all those groceries, because it's going to set the rest of your week up for success, and you're not going to have to do nearly as much cooking for the rest of the week. So it's really nice to do this. So first, I'm going to start my dinner. I'm going to go ahead and scrub some russet potatoes, and if you are just doing this by yourself, you can make less potatoes at a time, whatever you want to do, or you can prep a bunch in advance and leave them in the refrigerator for a few days, depending on how many of these you're going to be eating each day. But I'm just going to coat them with avocado oil. You can use olive oil or any oil that you have on hand, but you're going to want to make sure you poke the potatoes because they can explode in the oven due to all the steam being stuck inside the potatoes. So just make sure you pierce them, then top them with some kosher salt, and just go ahead and bake those at 425 125 degrees for about 60 to 70 minutes. And while those potatoes are cooking away in the oven, I'm going to start hard boiling some eggs. I'm going to go ahead and hard boil 9 eggs because I'm going to use some of them for lunch and some with some of the breakfasts I have. So I'm just going to boil these for about 8 minutes on the stovetop and then put them in an ice bath afterwards for about 5 minutes. I just find this gets perfectly hard-boiled eggs that are not overcooked, and the shell comes off a lot easier using an ice bath. So I highly recommend doing it this method, but the Instant Pot works really great too. And if you do decide to use the Instant Pot, just cook them for about 4 minutes, natural release for 5 minutes, and then ice bath for 5 minutes. And I'm going to go ahead and shred a bunch of my cheddar cheese. I don't want to shred it all. I'm just going to shred about half. I did have a leftover block in my refrigerator I'm going to use first, but you'll see I end up using a little bit less than the entire block for this meal plan. I just like to not let things go to waste, so I just use what I have in my fridge first. Then I'm going to go ahead and chop up my onion, my one giant onion for the week. I'm just going to dice it all because it will last in the refrigerator for up to 5 days, and I could freeze the diced onion, and it would be really easy just to pull it straight from the freezer if I need to, if I don't end up using it by the time they go bad. So that way nothing goes to waste. But all this prep being done, that means I can just grab things right out of the refrigerator, and I don't have to worry about chopping as much when I'm so busy during the week. And I'm also going to save the scraps from the onion that I dice because I'm going to be using it in a veggie stock later in the week. Don't throw away all your scraps. If they look especially dirty, you can throw those parts away and just use the cleanest looking parts of the onions. That's perfectly fine. I'm just going to put those in an airtight bag and put them in the freezer when I'm all finished. I'm also going to add some of my potato skins. We didn't have carrots this week, but normally I like to add carrot peels and celery ends or leaves, all sorts of different scraps. I just try to avoid like broccoli or cabbage just because it can make the stock bitter, but you can basically save any veggie scrap that you have on hand for the veggie broth. You're just going to put that in the freezer. So now I'm just chopping up some of the potatoes here, actually most of the potatoes here. I'm making quite a bit of mashed potatoes, and I'm not actually going to end up using all of these mashed potatoes for this week. We're going to have so much, so I do end up freezing some for later as well. So that's up to you. I ended up using about 5 pounds of potatoes for mashed potatoes, but you can use less if you find that you may not use as much as I'm using. So I'm just going to top my cubed potatoes with cold water and add plenty of kosher salt here. You can use any salt that you have on hand though. Then I'm just going to bring that to a boil and just let that cook away for about 12 to 15 minutes. Now, while that's cooking away, I'm going to go ahead and peel my eggs, and I'm just going to put them in a mason jar with a lid on it. I love these reusable storage lids. They're leak proof. They're great, and they just go right on top of mason jars. And I use these a lot for a lot of different ingredients. So I'm just going to put those in the refrigerator for later. And by this time, my potatoes are already ready. I can pierce them with a fork nice and easily. So that means they're ready to mash. So now I'm just going to strain all of the water out. And I actually like to bring my pot back to the stovetop, turn on the fire for about a minute and just kind of shake the potatoes to get some of that moisture out. And doing this just helps the fat really make these potatoes nice and creamy, because I'm going to be adding some butter here, about a half a stick of butter to almost a stick of butter. Just depends on how much that you want to add. I just kind of eyeball it, measure with my heart with this sort of thing. And then I'm just going to mash with my potato masher until everything is nice and smooth. And then I'm going to add some milk to my liking, just as much or as little as you want. And again, you don't need to use butter. You can use whatever you have on hand, whatever you like. I usually like to add some sort of sour cream or Greek yogurt to make it really nice and smooth, and season with salt and pepper as needed. But you can see it turns out beautifully with just butter and milk. So just use what you like for this. And now we're checking on my potatoes for dinner. So these should be just about done, easy to pierce with a fork, and they're nice and soft in the middle. It's been about 70 minutes. So now I'm going to take my full can of chili beans. I'm not going to drain and rinse them. I want all of that delicious sauce, but I am going to kind of doctor these up a little bit with some extra seasonings, just some onion powder, garlic powder, paprika, chili powder, cayenne, whatever I had on hand, whatever looked good. So just add what you want, or if you like them just as is, that's fine. I'm just going to warm them up on the stove, and then I'm just going to heat my frozen broccoli in a bowl in the microwave. I don't like to do it in the bag because I feel like it kind of tastes like plastic. So I just like to put them in a bowl, but that's up to you, however you want to cook them. Now I'm taking my cooked potatoes. I'm going to slice it, not all the way end to end. I like to leave about 1/2 inch, so that way I can squeeze it, open it, kind of slice the potato to get it going, and then add my cooked chili beans, some of that cheddar cheese and onions, and then some sour cream. And you can feel free to raid your fridge and pantry to add any other toppings you love to this, and then add some broccoli on the side, and dinner is done for this first night. So easy. And since my mashed potatoes are all done, I'm going to go ahead and make my mixture for some of my breakfast. Now I'm going to be making a cheddar and mashed potato croquette. This is my very first time making these, and they were a huge hit with my family. I'm just adding some cheddar cheese, just about a 1/4 cup, then 1 egg, 1/8 of a cup of sour cream, and a little bit of salt and pepper. And with the remaining mashed potatoes, I'm just putting those in an airtight container and putting them in the refrigerator to cool, because I'm not going to be using any more today. I like to put a large spoon in the middle to help them cool faster too, so that's something you may want to do. Now the croquettes, I'm just going to go ahead and stir all of these ingredients together until they're nice and combined, and you can add anything you want to this. If you have suggestions for croquettes, be sure to let me know, because I have no idea what else people put in these, but they turned out really good just like this. I'm going to put that mixture in the refrigerator, and the next morning I'm going to take them out and finish prepping all of these breakfasts here. So I'm just going to take a sleeve of the crackers, and I'm just going to smash a little more than half, because I'm not sure if I'm going to want to use all of them for this, because again, this is the first time I'm making this, but I did end up using a full sleeve of crackers. So I'm just going to chop those and add some paprika and give that a stir until combined. And then I'm going to take the croquette mixture and just take sort of a spoonful, maybe 2 tablespoons or so. I'm really just eyeballing it. It kind of reminds me of making drop cookies. Then I'll just drop that straight into the crackers and use a separate fork to sort of turn it so it gets nice and coated. And then I'll shake off the excess and put that on a parchment lined baking sheet. And I'm just going to repeat that until all of the mixture is fully rolled in the crackers. And I did actually end up freezing most of these, and they just came out beautifully straight from the freezer and into the air fryer when I went to cook them. I cooked some of them for breakfast this morning, and in the air fryer at about 400 degrees Fahrenheit, they took about 13 minutes, and from frozen, they took about 15 to 18 minutes. So really not a huge difference, and it came out great both times. So you can refrigerate them if you like, but I highly recommend making a few right away and then freezing the rest. I'm just going to put the entire tray of croquettes in my freezer, let them freeze for 2 hours, and then put them in an airtight container. And when I'm ready to cook them, I can just pull them out of the freezer and cook them just like that. And if you don't have an air fryer, you can bake them at 375 degrees for 18 to 20 minutes, or if they're frozen, 20 to 25 minutes. Just make sure that internally they're about 165 degrees once they're cooked. Now I just serve that with a banana and sometimes a hard-boiled egg, but these were really nice and filling and nice and crispy on the outside, soft on the inside. My kids loved these, especially my very picky eater. So that was a huge surprise, and I'm definitely going to be making these more often, because anytime I find something my kids will actually eat that uses more whole foods, I'm definitely going to continue making these. And those are the ones from frozen here. I added some ketchup just for fun. It was really delicious. Now I do a lot of things from scratch, but there are just some things I want to have really easy to give myself a break from being in the kitchen all the time, and that's where these adult Lunchables come in. I'm just going to put some crackers, slice some of that cheddar cheese, and slice an apple, and I'm just going to put that in an airtight container. Now, to keep the apples from browning, I like to put them in some water with a squeeze of lemon or lime if you have some on hand. Just give that a couple of minutes in the water and lemon mixture, and then I'm just going to strain out the water and rinse them, and there you go. They won't turn brown after that. So that's my little tip to keep the apples from browning, and they won't taste like lemon or lime. They just taste like apples, in my opinion. So just like that, very easy. I can keep this in the refrigerator so I can grab them easily. I saved the rest of these apples to go with my breakfast the next day too. So you could prep some of your apples for easy grab and go the next day or something like that. That could work if you have lemon or lime on hand to keep them from browning. And I really find that prepping a lot of these things in advance just really keeps me on track and helps me not do any takeout, especially when I have this very specific meal plan for myself. I make sure I use all my ingredients ingredients, nothing goes to waste, and I feel good because I save a ton of money. So this next recipe, I'm going to be making a traditional egg salad, but instead of mayonnaise, I'm using sour cream, and I'm going to be adding some onions for crunch. That's optional. Now here comes the mustard. I love mustard, so I'm going to be adding quite a bit here. Then just some salt, pepper, and paprika. But the seasonings are up to you. I've heard people like to do relish, and some people like to do horseradish. So really add anything you love to add all of that flavor into the egg salad. But if you just have the sour cream on hand, that'll work too. Sour cream, salt, and pepper. I just really encourage you to use what you have on hand. Look at the condiments you have in the refrigerator, the seasonings you have in your drawer, and just make it work with whatever you have on hand. That way you're not running to the store to get extra ingredients that you really don't need to get. Now I'm just going to be putting these on some crackers. This entire egg salad mixture will last about 3 to 5 days in the refrigerator. So really you can make as much or as little of this at a time as you like. But I just ended up using the full 6 eggs, and I had no problems finishing this within the 5 days. So it's up to you depending on how much egg salad you feel like you want to eat over the course of the next couple days. So you can just make a small batch if you like. Now with my leftover mashed potatoes, I'm going to go ahead and freeze 2 cups of mashed potatoes in an airtight container for the following week, just to put with some other recipe because I didn't have any use for it this week. I like to flatten the bag so that way it's easier to defrost later too. So that's in the freezer. And then I took 1 cup of mashed potatoes to make something a little bit different. This is completely optional. This is just me experimenting in the kitchen because I was really interested to know what else I could do with mashed potatoes. So to my bowl, I added the 1 cup of mashed potatoes, an egg, and about a cup of flour. I found this recipe for potato gnocchi, and I thought I would just give it a go. And this is just a really, really easy way to use mashed potatoes in a different way. We're essentially making pasta. So once the ingredients started to get incorporated, I add a little bit more flour and start getting my hands in there to really feel the dough and make sure the dough is just barely not sticky anymore because I don't want to add too much flour. Then I put that on a floured surface and cut it into quarters. So we've got 4 dough balls essentially here, and I'm just going to roll them out into a rope on my floured surface. And once it's a nice long, about 1 inch thick rope, then I'm going to just cut that with my bench scraper in 1-inch pieces as well. So we're just going to end up with these 1 inch by 1 inch little pillows of potato gnocchi. And I'm just going to set those on a plate so that way they're ready to go when I want to cook them. Now I will recommend you can freeze some of this gnocchi for later and cook it directly from the freezer because I cooked it all at once and it was just way too much, and I don't feel like it's good if you cook it and then refrigerate it and then try to reheat it. It just doesn't turn out great. So once you've gotten to this step, just freeze most of it and take out 1 portion to cook at a time. And that way it will turn out nice and fresh each time. Now I'm just going to salt some water and get that boiling. And in the meantime, I'm just making a brown butter sage sauce because I was trying to look for a sauce that would work with the potato gnocchi without using any additional ingredients. So I had mentioned butter, so that's what I'm using. I had sage from my garden, so I added that, but I really don't think you need to. But if you have tomato sauce on hand, I feel like tomato sauce with some mozzarella and Parmesan would work really good because this brown butter sage sauce was good, but I feel like it was lacking a little bit of flavor, maybe because my mashed potatoes were not super salted. So I think it just depends on how your mashed potatoes are made too, depending on what kind of sauce you'd like to use for this. And potato gnocchi goes really, really good in a soup, so you can make a Tuscan soup or a vegetable soup, minestrone. There's just so many recipes you can use the potato gnocchi in, so it's really great. Now after I've added the potato gnocchi to the boiling water, I'm just going to wait for them to float. It only takes about 3 to 5 minutes. Then I'm just going to scoop them out and put them in the bowl. The brown butter sauce, all I did was on low is melt the butter, swirl it, because the key is to not stir it. You just want to swirl, and then I added some of that sage there to kind of fry it up. Once I started seeing the brown bits there, like you can see here, it's done. So I'll turn off the heat, and then I'm just going to spoon the brown butter on top. But again, I did feel like I needed to add a little bit of cracked pepper on top, some Parmesan cheese, something to add a little more salt. So you can play with the sauce and kind of make whatever you want, or save some of this gnocchi to make a nice soup with some of the broth we're going to have in a few minutes here. Just really use your imagination, but it's a really fun way to use mashed potatoes. Now this next recipe is one that's really close to my heart and one of my all-time favorites. The best thing to do with mashed potatoes in my mind mind is to make potato pancakes for breakfast or lunch. It's just so delicious. So to a bowl, I'm using my 2 cups of mashed potatoes, a 1/4 cup of flour, about 1 to 2 eggs, some salt, pepper, and then you can add garlic powder, onion powder, or some diced onions. If you had chives, you can add that, some of the shredded cheese if you'd like, and then you're just going to give that a good mix. What I love about this is you can really add anything that you love into this, and it will turn out amazing every single time. So any seasonings that you like, any kind of onions or garlic, and then after it's all mixed together, you're just going to grab a little bit with your fork and mash it down into kind of a pancake. I'm going to heat some oil in a pan. Once the oil is hot, then I'll just go ahead and put my pancakes in. Once they're nice and golden on one side, I'll give them a flip, make them nice and golden on the next side, and that's it. It's so easy, a really fast breakfast or lunch idea. Top it with some sour cream, a little more cheese, some onions if you like, some hot sauce, and maybe serve it with an apple or banana. Next, we're going to go ahead and make the vegetable stock. I'll get all of those scraps from the freezer, add them to a large stock pot, and just add about 8 to 10 cups of water. It really just depends on how much water you want to add, how much stock you want to have. It's going to add a lot of flavor. Now I'm just going to partially cover this and let it simmer for about 2 hours. And since we only have onion scraps and potato scraps, this is going to taste just like onions and potatoes, which is great to go with the next recipe I'm making, which is a potato soup. One of my favorite recipes. I usually make it with bacon, but I don't have bacon on hand, so I'm just going to omit it. But I am just going to small dice my potatoes. You want to make sure they're nice and bite-sized. And then I'll just add those to a bowl and set them aside. I'll get the vegetable stock as soon as it's ready, and we're just going to go ahead and measure out 4 cups of this stock and save the rest for other recipes later in the week. And we're just going to put that covered in the refrigerator for later. Now I am going to go ahead and add a little bit of the bouillon to my broth just to add some extra flavor. This is optional. Again, you can use a little soy sauce instead, some coconut aminos, or just a little bit of salt. It's just to add some flavor. Now in my large stock pot, I'm just going to wipe that out, and then I'll add my butter and melt that and add some onions. I'm just using about a 1/2 cup of onions, but use as much or as little as you like here. I'm just going to saute those onions until they're nice and soft and translucent. It really only takes about 2 or 3 minutes. Next, I'm going to stir in about 1/3 cup of flour, and I'm just going to stir that and continue cooking until it's lightly golden, about 2 or 3 minutes. If you don't like flour, you can do a cornstarch slurry later on to make the soup nice and thick, or you can omit those altogether and just get the soup nice and creamy by mashing the potatoes a little bit more. You'll see at the end here, and you can decide depending on what you have on hand. But then I'm just going to add that stock a little bit at a time, so that way we don't have a lumpy soup. We just want to make sure it's nice and incorporated before we add more liquid, and just keep adding that until it's all added. And then we're going to add about 2 cups of our milk, and then we'll just season the soup with some salt, pepper, a little bit of chili powder if you have some on hand, and then I'm going to add my potatoes. We're just going to bring that to a simmer, sort of a low boil, because we don't want to scorch the milk, and then we're just going to let that cook until those potatoes are nice and fork tender. It might take about 10 to 12 minutes, so just keep an eye on it after 10 minutes and just make sure that those potatoes still have a bite, but they're easy to pierce. Once the potatoes are nice and cooked through, I'm just going to start mashing them with a hand masher. You can use a hand blender if you want a smoother soup, and this is the point where you would add the cornstarch slurry if you didn't use flour. If you feel like the soup needs to be a little bit thicker, you can just add a little bit of cornstarch with cold water, mix it up, and then add it to the soup and just bring it to a boil for a couple minutes till it thickens. Then I'm just going to add about a 1/4 cup to 1/2 cup of sour cream, give it a stir, and then just heat it through and serve it up with some shredded cheddar cheese, some sour cream, maybe some onions and crackers. Such an easy and delicious dinner, and so easy to modify. I highly recommend giving this one a try. If you had bacon, of course, it would be really delicious with that as well, or any leftover meat. If you want some ham, some chicken, you can really just make this soup your own. It is really delicious and super comforting. This next dinner idea is a tofu noodle casserole, but if you don't like tofu, you could get a can of chicken or use any protein or cooked meat or any kind of meat that you like for this recipe. It'll all work great. I'm going to add a couple of teaspoons of chicken bouillon to 2 cups of water to sort of make a chicken broth. Again, it's optional. You could use soy sauce instead or just salt, whatever you prefer, but we are just going to need 2 cups of that liquid. Then I'm going to open up my tofu, strain it a little bit, and try to get a little bit of that moisture out with a clean towel. And I'm just going to crumble my tofu. Now, to add a little bit more flavor to the tofu, I did add some soy sauce to kind of add a a little bit of that umami flavor, a little bit of salt, and a little bit of color as well. And to my pot, I'm just going to melt a couple tablespoons of butter. This is 4 tablespoons of butter actually. Then I'm just going to add my crumbled tofu to that melted butter and start giving that a saute, and add a few onions. I'm using about a half a cup of onions or so, but this is optional. I just love onions in my casserole, and I'm just going to go ahead and saute that and stir it until everything is nice and tender and cooked through. This is going to take about 6 or 7 minutes, maybe a little bit more depending on how crispy you want your tofu. And you can make your tofu on the side if you want to crisp it in the air fryer or in a separate pan. You can do that as well. And if you're using a can of chicken or something like that, you can just add that later on. You don't have to add it at this point. Then once that's nice and cooked through, I'm going to add my flour, and again cook the flour out about 2 to 3 minutes until it's nice and golden, because we don't want to taste flour in the casserole. So make sure that you're cooking that flour flavor out for a few minutes until it's golden. Then slowly add in your chicken broth, about a half a cup at a time, stirring completely before adding any more liquid. And then we're going to add our 1 cup of milk. Now we're actually making cream of chicken soup from scratch here, just using the flour, the butter, the broth, and the milk. So if you didn't have those ingredients, you could use 2 cans of cream of chicken soup instead. But this is how you make cream of chicken soup if you didn't have any on hand. I'm also going to add some seasonings, just a little garlic powder, onion powder, salt, and pepper. And I'm just going to let that come to a low simmer. And I'll cook my egg noodles on the side. I'm making about 3 cups of egg noodles in boiling water on the side. And then I'm going to add my frozen veggies to my cream of chicken soup mixture here, and just let that cook for a couple of minutes. It doesn't have to cook all the way through, because we will be baking this in the oven as well. And I'm just going to cook those egg noodles until they're about 2 minutes before they're fully cooked through. Then I'll just strain those and add them to our mixture here. And then I've got a casserole dish that I've got prepared here. I didn't have to grease it or anything like that, so that's great. We're just going to pour that in. It's a 9 by 13, but you can use any size that you like. And then I'm just going to top that with some crackers. And I've seen some people use the crackers with some melted butter, so you could do that if you wanted to. I just felt like since these were butter crackers, they really didn't need any more butter, and they crisp up really nicely in the oven. I'm just going to bake it at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for about 30 minutes until everything's nice and bubbly and golden, and that's it. I will say this was a lot of casserole for one person to eat, and it did not keep well in the freezer. So I recommend only making a half portion, then using the rest of those egg noodles and veggies to make a soup with whatever leftover veggies you have on hand, with some chicken bouillon and some water, or some of the veggie broth and some of the tofu or chicken if that's what you were using, just to make a really delicious veggie soup on top of some egg noodles. So that's just another idea for something to make. This is just random veggies from my garden. Let's make a really tasty breakfast or dessert with 1 apple. It's just something fun to do, a little bit different. I'm just going to heat my pan on maybe medium heat or so, and then I'm going to add a tablespoon of butter. Get that nice and melty. Melt that butter. And I've sliced the apples as thin as I want them, but you can of course make them a little bit thinner or thicker, or you can make them in chunks. I usually do chunks, but today I just felt like doing something a little bit different. So it's up to you, however you want to slice the apples. It really does not make a huge difference for this. Then I'm going to go ahead and add my apples into the butter. There we go. Get a little bit of, I'm just going to get a little bit of color on them here to make sure that this is getting nice and stirred so it doesn't burn. So we're going to do this for about 5 or 6 minutes until the apples are starting to get tender. Ooh, it's starting to smell delicious already. And you can really cook this as much as you like. If you like your apples to be a little more tender, you can cook them longer. If you want them to have a little bit more of a bite, you can cook them for less time. That's up to you. So I'm just going to take about a half a teaspoon of cornstarch and mix it with some cold water here. Give this a stir. There we go. Once that's all stirred up, I'm going to add this to the apples. And I'm just going to let that boil for maybe 2 minutes or so. This is optional, actually. You do not have to do cornstarch. This is just going to make it like a nice thick sauce, so everything is really nice and coated. But you certainly don't have to do the cornstarch slurry. You can just omit that altogether. If you don't have any cornstarch on hand or you don't like it, that's perfectly fine. Now that is nice and thick. I'm gonna go ahead and add about 1/8 of a cup of brown sugar. And just a little bit of cinnamon here. Here we go. And a dash of salt to bring out the sweetness here. There we go, not too much. Now I'll just go ahead and give that a mix. My brown sugar is always clumpy. I do not know how to prevent that. This is starting to smell incredible. It smells just like apple pie. So, get it nice and coated. And we're just gonna let that sort of boil for a couple minutes here until everything is nice and coated and that sugar is a little bit caramelized. And then that's gonna be it. I'm just gonna serve it up. This is perfect with some homemade granola or some vanilla ice cream on top. Now, if you had oats on hand, you could make some homemade granola to put on top. I personally love to have this with a little bit of vanilla ice cream at the end of the day, but it's a great little breakfast accompaniment or to have as a dessert, all on its own too. You don't really need to add anything to it. It is just really, really delicious. So definitely give this a try. Just one of my favorite quick and easy things to throw together. I hope you found some inspiration and got a few ideas for things to make in your home, but if you have some other suggestions or questions or requests for future videos, please leave them down below in the comments. I take all of your suggestions really seriously, and I like to make videos that you want to see. So please be sure to leave those down below so that I can read those and start planning more videos for you specifically. Also, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. And YouTube thinks that you'd like to watch another video, so be sure to click on that wherever that is, and then I'll see y'all in the next video. Bye.